Still hear me? Okay, so I spent some time watching these debates on callouts, and there's been a couple of them. So I'm going to do this maybe a little bit differently than I normally would. I want to stress here that I'm not arguing that Edward Snowden didn't have at least partially good intentions. Well, my argument is going to be primarily that good intentions, poorly executed, does not a hero make. Edward Snowden is not a hero. If anything, he is a well-intentioned coward. I want the audience to take a minute and think about who we consider to be real heroes. Let's think about Rosa Parks, a hero. Think about Martin Luther King, a hero. Think about the soldiers that run out, risk their life, get killed, get injured, or maybe they turn out okay, but what they do is they risk something and they suffer. They don't suffer in the small, petty way that Edward Snowden has suffered. They don't run away from their responsibilities. Edward Snowden, what he did, no one can deny, is a crime. Hands down, what he did is illegal. He broke the law. Even though he did it for what some will argue is the right reasons, he did not stay to face the responsibility of his actions. So he may have been well-intentioned. He may want to partially help enlighten the American people. But he did it, and he did it in such a way that he did not get the true responsibility. He did not take responsibility for his actions. He ran away. And when you run away, when you don't face the consequences, no matter how well-intentioned you are, you're not a hero. I'll pass the mic.
Okay. Well, I'll try to get through this. I'm pretty sick, so I'm not going to be on the top of my game. But obviously, I disagree with the pro. I believe Edward Snowden was a hero, and I'm really glad that he called Edward Snowden a coward, because we're going to have some great clash here. I'm going to use Merriam-Webster's definition of hero as one who shows great courage. So again, the opposite of cowardice. There's no doubt whatsoever that Snowden showed great courage in choosing to step forward when so many others did not, and warn the American people about the gross violation of our laws and our privacy being perpetrated against us by the lawless Republican and Democratic administrations alike. Snowden risked and continues to risk his family, liberty, and even life. We've seen the way Donald Trump has threatened him and said he deserves death, to stand for the rule of law. What is criminal is not always unlawful. Statutes do not always stand by the true law. Of course, we held the Nazis culpable at Nuremberg for not doing the right thing, even though, of course, they were following their own laws, because there are higher standards than that. Today's debate is a fact debate, and the debater who's better able to prove whether or not the resolution is true by the preponderance of the evidence should win. First, I'll explain how Snowden exhausted all his options and what exactly he did. I don't have much time to talk about what he did, but we all remember that he leaked the important information that our own government was spying on us. I'll expand on that in later speeches. Neither the U.S. Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act nor President Obama's Presidential Policy Directive 19, which extended to the intelligence community, covered contractors, and so he was absolutely not covered from protection from retaliation in what he did. This is according to the Washington Post, NBC News. He took his concerns to 10 officials in the NSA and the intelligence community. That's according to the Washington Post and Snowden's testimony to the EU Parliament. And finally, not even U.S. prosecutors claim that the information he took endangered U.S. lives, and the U.S. government has refused to release any evidence that it has, so that shouldn't be of concern. Finally, since then, the Obama administration defended the programs under the Patriot Act, Section 215, but this was found to be unconstitutional. in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the highest ruling on it. The courts ruled in favor of basically Snowden, saying that he revealed something that was grossly unconstitutional. And Congress later refused to update the Patriot Act, protecting doubly against anything like this happening again. And I'll get into my next speech about how even around the world, officials celebrated this triumph for privacy. And for those reasons, I think Edward Snowden was clearly a hero.
All right, just a quick clarification, if I could. I don't mind using the Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition, but you specified that you want to focus on definition D, which says one who shows great courage. So then would you then accept that if it could be demonstrated that Edward Snowden just showed, say, an average amount of courage, then he would not be a hero?
I really like the big clash we have going in coward and hero, but yeah, in general, a hero is someone who puts a lot on the line. I'm fine defending the fact that he risked his life, his liberty, his family, he's risked everything. So I'm fine in that ground, but I do like the clash we have on the hero versus coward.
Okay, so I do still feel that Edward Snowden qualifies, I believe, as a coward who maybe did a brave act, but is definitely a coward. And at the very least, he only showed a modicum of courage. You've mentioned here that he put his family and his life at risk. Last I read here, Snowden is living in Russia. His girlfriend has gone over and stayed with him. So now he is living in Russia with his girlfriend. So he's not in the United States, but he's living somewhere else in Russia. So he had a change of scenery. I'm not sure that that's going to qualify putting his life at risk or his family at risk, considering that he was able to have his partner, his girlfriend, come over and live with them. Okay. You also said that Edward Snowden shared some what you would call important information with people. I'm not going to argue that some of the things that he shared were definitely important. However, I am going to point out that Edward Snowden shared 1.5 million documents is the estimate. If that's off by a couple 100,000, it's still a huge amount. Now, considering he only had those documents for a short time, it's unreasonable that he was able to personally go through all the documents. And so when he gave that information to the media or to the people that leaked the information or reported on it, that's 1.5 million documents, which he had not personally vetted, which could, if in fact, he did not know whether or not it would put American lives in danger. So when you say that, hey, it turned out it didn't really impact anyone or put anyone in lives in danger, that is lucky. He got lucky. He did not know going in that any one of the 1.5 million documents that he hadn't personally gone through, because there's no way he could have, given the time restraint. He did not know what he was giving over or how it would be used or its risks or its implications. There's no way he can know. And I want to be clear then that he didn't just go to the media. He didn't go to Switzerland. He then went to Hong Kong and then on to Russia. So he had that information in the hands of countries that, though we have a shaky alliance with them, they are not our friends. So seems to me that he put all that information and American lives knowingly at risk, even though he had good intentions. It was poorly executed, and he did it in such a way that doesn't make him brave. He went to the people who he knew would protect him just to get back at the United States. So he went to the big bully down the street because he was scared of another bully. The only people who runs from one bully to another bully are cowards.
Awesome. I'm going to address those three main points, and I'm going to jump into a bunch of stuff I want to bring up. First, my opponent said that he didn't risk really anything. However, I would contend that he pretty obviously risked everything. We had every major presidential candidate from both parties saying at minimum he deserved to have his liberty taken away and be imprisoned. And we had multiple candidates, especially the man who became president, saying that he deserved to be, torn arm from limb, basically, for what he did. his family. He had to leave his fiance without notice to protect her. She eventually, years later, followed him to Russia. They got back together, but at the time, it was definitely a harrowing ordeal. But he did it because he felt like he had to. Addressing the pro's next point, this was not a broad brush leak. In fact, I don't have time to get to it, but I have a card that talks about that I can bring up later. He worked with a committee of journalists. The documentary Citizen 4, which was made in the hotel room in Hong Kong with him, shows how he worked with Glenn Greenwald and some other reporters for the Washington Post, the New York Times, professionals, the same papers that had leaked the Pentagon papers and other things like that, to determine what should be leaked to reveal the illegal behavior of the NSA, and what should be retained. It wasn't a massive dump on the internet like PFC Bradley Manning did with WikiLeaks and other incidences throughout history. This was totally different. And he wasn't lucky, he was responsible in how he went about this. Finally, Hong Kong has an extradition treaty with the U.S., so he wasn't really out of our grasp when he went to Hong Kong. Glenn Greenwald just thought it was a good place to meet up. And I mean, at that point, once we did issue a warrant for him, he was willing to go pretty much wherever would take him, which makes sense because obviously you're not going to want to go someplace where people can get you and kill you for doing the right thing. So now I'm going to jump into reading a couple of important pieces of evidence. This is from Lady Shami Chakrabarti. She was the Shadow Attorney General for England and Wales and was director of the Liberty Organization from September 2003 to March 2016. She had this to say about Snowden. She said, quote, "Let me be completely clear. Edward Snowden is a hero. Saying so does not make me an apologist for terror. It makes me a firm believer in democracy and the rule of law. For years, the UK and US governments broke the law. For years, they hid the sheer scale of their spying. Without Snowden, we wouldn't have a clue what they were up to." And I'll pass the mic.
Okay, so you made the point here that one of the reasons that Edward fled was he was afraid of retaliation. So he knew that what he was doing would be considered wrong. Now, you made the argument that the U.S. government would get you and kill you. I mean, the U.S. government, especially when in a situation like this, would not simply wipe him away, would not kill him. That is just a hyperbole, an exaggeration of the impact that the response that the United States would have. Yes, they would have arrested him. They would arrest him because he stole classified documents and leaked them to the press. You can't deny that stealing classified documents and leaking them to the press is a crime, is treason, is punishable by imprisonment, could be punishable up to death. Historically, we do not kill, especially recently, do not kill people who dump, who do mass information dump. We put them in jail. You gave an example of Bradley Manning. Bradley Manning did, I guess she's a girl now. But Bradley Manning paid for his crime, took her punishment, was pardoned. If you want to say between Edward Snowden and Bradley Manning, which one was a hero, I mean, they did basically the same thing. I would not call either one of them a hero, I would say, but in that scale of who did something brave, you could say that Bradley Manning paid for his crimes. Where it's obvious that Edward Snowden hasn't. You read this quote from the government from the cause saying that the UK and US government hid the scale of their spying. Okay, to me that seems an odd thing to say. I mean, I would assume that all spying on every scale is to be hidden, or else it wouldn't be called spying. So to say that the government hid the scale of its spying seems a little odd. Now, we have to remember that nothing that the U.S. government was doing was illegal by the U.S. government standards. Everything was justified. Everything was passed through the court. So you said that there were so many people that knew what Edward Snowden did and didn't tell on it. that's because what they were doing was not illegal. So, and you said that there has been no impact. Now, I mean, it's clear that we've changed the way that we allow governments to gather information, especially from people on American soil. So that has had at least some impact on their ability to protect us.
Okay, my opponent spent a while talking about how the government didn't do anything wrong in his last speech, so I'm definitely going to address that one head on. The government was wrong. Let's start out with the obvious. Like I said in my first speech, the United States Court of Appeals in the Second District, which is one level below the Supreme Court didn't hear the case, ruled that it was absolutely unconstitutional, beyond the pale, that the government was using Section 215 of the Patriot Act to do this bulk collection. And just months before Edward Snowden came forward, James Clapper, head of the NSA, testified before our representatives in Congress that there was no bulk collection of data. And if the intelligence community cannot be held responsible by our representatives in our legislature, then who are they responsible to? No one. And that's why Edward Snowden had to do what he did and come forward. My opponent mentioned that this is a crime. It might be against the statute of the law, but when someone is breaking the law, an entire government is acting lawlessly, then it is the duty, according to international law, according to precedents we set in the Nuremberg trials when we held the Nazis accountable, that they must come forward and do the right thing no matter what the written law is, and otherwise they're a participant. And now I'm going to go over some very important quotes about this. Daniel Ellsberg, who was the person who brought forward the Pentagon Papers, he said Snowden did what he did because he recognized the NSA surveillance programs for what they are: dangerous, unconstitutional activity. The wholesale invasion of Americans and foreign citizens' privacy does not contribute to our security. Slate pointed out a bunch of reasons why Snowden couldn't come forward, including that his employer, Booz Allen, said that he's not supposed to come forward to anyone who might be involved in wrongdoing. This wrongdoing extended all the way to the President of the United States. And obviously, he's not going to tip off the people that he's reporting on. He had to go outside of that to the public, to the American people, the people who were being cheated on by our government. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, on the first anniversary of Snowden's revelations, pointed out 65 major problems that we learned of that we never would have known without him, including the fact that our government was sharing this information they gathered, personal information on us, with foreign governments, including Israel, distributing it behind our backs, that the Justice Department had lied to the Supreme Court, and many other things. That's lawless.
Okay. I'm not going to use this debate to argue that what Edward Snowden exposed wasn't a big deal. I mean, I, of course, agree that it should have been found out. Now, I want to argue here that Edward Snowden, the way he went about doing it, was not something that was brave. It was not of great courage. It did not take him great courage. He could have done this quite differently. He could have gone to any sort of he could have stayed on American soil. He could have gone public with his information. It would have had the same impact. He could have taken his punishment as it comes. The con here has already argued that Edward Snowden ran to another country because he was afraid of punishment, afraid of retaliation. What makes someone a hero is because they do what they feel is right, even though it's going to have severe consequences. Those consequences he has avoided. He has asked for asylum in Russia. He stayed there. He'll be there to at least 2020. His family's now moved to him. I mean, he has avoided his responsibility. So if you want to say that what he did was brave, if you want to say that that one brave act that he did showed some courage, I won't argue with you. Maybe he has a little bit of courage, but everything leading up to that, he did very cowardly. If imagine, I'm just going to bring in an alternate scenario here. So imagine Rosa Parks sat on the front of the bus until the police got there. Then she ran away to, say, the enemy of the state, or in her case, she would have ran away to the KKK compound. Then she fought her battle using the news. So now would you still call Rosa Parks a hero? Would she still have brought about the change? Maybe by giving the information like that and starting the battle, she would have still brought about change, would have still brought it light to an important point, but she wouldn't be a hero. She would be, if anything, have good intentions, but didn't have the courage to go through with what it took. We don't have people who don't deal with the consequences of their actions. We don't hold them up as an American hero. Let's look at Gandhi. Do you think if Gandhi had done something different, if Gandhi had run away from the change he was trying to make, would we still call Gandhi a hero? Gandhi stood up for what he believed in, went to jail, was punished, took his punishment, continued to fight for change. He took responsibility for his actions as opposed to running and hiding.
The debate seems to have shifted back to bravery, so that's what I'm going to talk about for most of this speech. Snowden was absolutely brave. At the time of his release, when he was in a hotel room in Hong Kong meeting with journalists, he didn't know where he was going to end up. He didn't know he was going to end up in Russia. He didn't even know if charges were going to be pressed against him or anything like that. It was all very much up in the air, but he acted before he knew. That was bravery. That was heroism. Before he knew whether or not he was going to be assassinated, like we could definitely have done, he chose to act because it was the right thing to do. And he left a high-paying career, a beautiful fiance living in Hawaii. He left the safety of his homeland, the country he grew up in, and he had served for most of his all of his adult life. He left all of that willingly because he knew he had to do what was right. That's brave, and that is heroic. It was the act of revealing this that was brave itself. Just like Rosa Parks resisted on the bus, the act of revealing the documents was 100% of what Edward Snowden had to do to be considered brave. It's just foolish for someone to subject themselves to unjust punishment. That's a martyr complex. That doesn't make them more brave to subject themselves to wrong, evil, unjust punishment after they do something brave. I'm going to talk a little bit about Snowden's bravery. Here we go. Okay, I lost my card here. Oh, crap. I appear to have completely lost my card. However, I wanted to point out that leading up to Trump's election, the Amnesty International did an entire campaign about how Edward Snowden was a hero, and they had literally dozens and dozens of groups and individuals sign on to this, including the Human Rights Watch, the ACLU, individuals who worked in the CIA in operations, individuals who worked with political prisoners and transparency, privacy, the founder of Twitter. Tons of different people signed on to this, calling Edward Snowden a hero and being thankful for all the many things he revealed. Like I mentioned earlier, the Electronic Frontier Foundation listed no less than 65 gut-wrenching critical revelations that emerged out of the Snowden release on its first anniversary, including the fact that the NSA was lying to Congress, the Justice Department lied to the Supreme Court, they're spying on video games chats, everything about us, and Snowden bravely revealed this.
Okay, again, I want to be clear. What he revealed is definitely concerning, but the way that he went about doing it, the way that he continues to go about doing it, is not heroic. You talk about how submitting to unjust punishment is not heroic. I want to know if you would consider, if we use Rosa Parks already, if we consider her not submitting to the punishment of getting arrested, being put in jail, that humiliation, that fight, recovering from that, do you think that that played an integral part in her becoming a hero? I mean, I think it does. If she would have run and hid from her responsibilities, hid from her stand that she was making, she would not be celebrated today. I'm going to argue and make a small appeal to emotion here. When we're talking about heroes, we would look to our children and say, this is a person that you should admire. This is a person that you should emulate. Now, would you tell your children that, oh, if you found some documents that are really concerning to the people, what you should do is to gather those documents up? I know you can't read all of them, but just gather about 1.5 million of them. Then just go away to another country and then get some reporters around, have them look through it, go ahead and dump everything, and then go seek asylum into a potentially enemy of the United States, including the enemy that, I mean, we now know definitely had some impact here in the United States that didn't have our best interests at heart. So you tell me, is that the kind of person you would tell your child to emulate? You want to say, do what's right, but are they doing what's right? Or are they doing just what's, seems to me that I would you be telling your child to, hey, if you see something that's wrong, you should, instead of trying to fix it here and working with it and trying to change your countries, change your community, you should instead just run away and let other people handle it.
I do have a child, and I hope that I can raise her to very much emulate what Snowden did here. Again, according to the Washington Post and his testimony to the EU Parliament, neither of which you rebutted, he tried at least 10 or 11 different officials within the U.S. intelligence community. None of them shared his concerns. And I want to read a card about that particular thing. Before bringing an urgent concern to Congress, the guidance that Booz Allen Hamilton issued, and which the president had also issued, says that whistleblowers must first notify the DNI of their intent to contact the Congressional Intelligence Committee directly. In other words, if Snowden wanted to inform the Senate Intelligence Committee that the DNI had lied, he would first have to inform the DNI that he intended to inform on them. And there were no protections for retribution whatsoever for private contractors like Edward Snowden. This was absolutely an unwinnable situation. What we did not need for him to do is inform them that he was going to inform the people and then have him locked away, silenced, had retribution of some sort brought against him. What we needed is for the people to actually get the message. And for them to do that, he did something very brave. He left his fiance, his home, his bank accounts, which were frozen. He left behind his country and his citizenship and everything to let the American people know about the gross crime that was being committed against them. And in this whole thing, he was very responsible. As Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who worked with them, said, Snowden spent months meticulously studying every document. This wasn't a vast upload to the internet. And again, various organizations have signed on to the pledge that says, as a person committed to fighting for free societies everywhere, I am grateful to Edward Snowden for his willingness to risk his freedom for mine, which is courage. And the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Steve Wozniak, dozens of CIA officers, all sorts of different people have signed on to this statement because Congress has gotten rid of any potential for this. They were absolutely outraged, refused to renew Section 215. But even if Section 215 still stood, the appeals court, the federal courts in the U.S. have ruled that what Clapper was doing was absolutely wrong. Everyone knows that the head of the intelligence agency was lying to us, the American people. We know that our personal information was literally being given for free to foreign governments to use how they wanted without a warrant. And literally hundreds of millions of people in dozens of different countries were being spied on with almost limitless power. And Edward Snowden was a hero for revealing that.
Okay, I'm just going to point out that in this last speech, my opponent made it clear that Edward Snowden did have step-by-step process in order to bring his revelations to light and to make change. Even if that didn't work, if this hypothetical threat to his life and liberty were something he was scared of, he could have gone to the American press and could have given all that information and done it in a way where he stayed in country, where he took the responsibility for his actions. Instead, he ran. Even a coward can do what is right once.